ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरुं वैष्णवांश श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगण रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्ण पादान् सहगण ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च नम ओं विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदांत स्वामिन्निति नामिने। नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देश तारिणे। हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपते गोपेश गोपिका कांत राधा कांत नमस्तुते। तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यस्य कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. So welcome to the Manah Shiksha series. So yesterday we began the discussion on verse 1, commentary by His Holiness Bhakti Vigyan Goswami Maharaj. So we have divided the commentary into various themes for our understanding. And we saw yesterday paragraphs 1 to 4. What does Manah Shiksha teach? It teaches to develop rag, attachment to Radha and Krishna, Vraja Raja and Krishna. And this rag is the path of spontaneity, and it is built depending on our heartfelt aspiration. And yesterday we saw how there are these two paths within the Raganuga sadhana. Within the four sampradayas, everyone is practicing Vaidhi Bhakti. But Mahaprabhu came to give us Raga Marga Bhakti Korite Pracharan. He came to give us that Raga Marg. And Mahaprabhu was simply day and night crying in Gambhira in separation from Krishna. And he taught this to Sarup Damodar and he told them to teach others. Sarup Damodar in turn taught this to Vakreshwar Pandit, and then to Gopal Guru Goswami, and then Jhan Chandra Goswami. And this is called as the Bhairanga Raganuga Sadhana, where this rag attachment is practiced through deity worship. So this is one school. And then there is another school which is taught to Raghunath Das Goswami by Sarup Damodar. So these are the two paths. And when Raghunath Das Goswami asked, please teach me, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, I don't know anything. I'm just crying for Krishna. But then he spoke only one verse. Amanina manadhana Krishna nam sadalebe vraje radha Krishna seva manase karebe. So one should be humbler than the blade of glass and constantly take the holy name. And one in his meditation in the purified mind served Radha and Krishna. This is the path of Raganuga sadhana. And we saw that it requires humility. Um, this whole science was taught to Raghunath Das Goswami, which is actually explained in Manah Shiksha. Then we saw the prelude to verse 1, which is paragraphs 14 to 16. Raghunath Das Goswami is pleading his mind, and he's offering, he's holding his feet, Drita Pada, and he's praying. What is he praying? Sada Dambam Hitva. And why Raghunath Das Goswami approaches this strategy is because the mind is a very difficult thing to control. So now, today we will begin this very important theme, addressing the mind. This is from paragraph 17 to 43. It is a long discussion. So we'll systematically go through what Maharaj has to say about addressing the mind. In fact, Srila Prabhupada in his Upadeshamrit purport to text 8, when Raganuga Sadhana is only mentioned in one verse in Upadeshamrit, that is text 8. And in the purport, Prabhupada elaborately speaks about the mind. So similarly, Maharaj also, before going into the actual instructions of Manah Shiksha, he emphasizes the importance of controlling the mind and regulating the mind, because Raghunath Das Goswami is addressing the mind. So that's how Maharaj deals with this. So let us now go through this. Paragraph 17. First of all, Raghunath Das Goswami describes his mind. He says, Swanta Bhrata, my inner self. Swa Anta. Swa means oneself, Anta means inside, and Bhrata means brother. So he's addressing very, you can say, in a sweet, soft, and humble way to his own mind as my dear brother. It is very important to first of all understand what the mind is. Sometimes it is very difficult to explain to people that they are not their mind. Understanding we are not the body is easy, but to understand we are not the mind is difficult. Raghunath Das Goswami explains a very important point about Swanta. What is that point? We should understand that in the conditioned state, the soul delegates the functions of our personality to the mind. In one sense, we are our mind. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in one of his bhajans, he makes it this point. He says, Manera Manush. Manera Manush means the man made up of his mind. So our personality is whatever our state of mind is. That's it. We identify our personality with our state of mind. Actually, it is as if there is no soul. It is sleeping. All is delegated to the mind. Therefore, we find it so hard to detach ourselves from our mind. For this reason, Raghunath Das addresses his inner self with much respect. That's why, in order to deal with this mind, he approaches this strategy that he addresses the mind with much respect. Paragraph 19. The soul is eternal, full of knowledge and bliss. So where do the vices reside? The answer is the mind. We have merged with it so tightly that we have delegated to our mind the functions of ourselves. Now, ourselves refers to the soul here. So the soul's functions are completely delegated to our mind. It has a general power of autonomy. Whatever we do, it is our mind. All the past life impressions, some scars, make up our personality. A child is born a ready-made personality with an endless stream of desires. The seed of these desires are already in the mind. This situation is the reason why we should treat our mind with much respect. So, Raghunath Das Goswami's strategy, why to treat the mind with much respect, is because these are the reasons which Maharaj is explaining. In one sense, I recently heard one lecture where it was mentioned that just like a car which is moving at a high speed, say 100 kilometers or 120 kilometers per hour. So if the car is moving at this speed, this is the torsion. What is the engine speed? The engine is running at much, much higher speed, maybe 3,600 kilometers per hour, RPM. That is the RPM that's how they measure. So at such a high speed, the engine is moving, and the engine is creating the energy and the torsion by which it can move the car. So similarly, the mind, which is completely under the control of the material energy, and it is completely moving under the dictation of the material energy. And we have to overcome this material energy in order to, work ourselves on the spiritual platform, that is the soul, and not on the dictation of the material energy, which is the mind. So it's not an easy task. And that's why Raghunath Das Goswami adopts this strategy that he treats the mind with respect. Raghunath Das Goswami demonstrates that respect here by saying, "Oh, my dear brother, my mind, Bhratu." So that respect is, by addressing him as Bhratu. So we all have experience that when we want to get things done from someone, of course, if it is not a paid service, but it is a voluntary service, when we address that person with respect and humility and win over him, and then we can get, otherwise, if we use our force and try to dictate, the mind will revolt. So not so easy. So similarly, to our inner self, the same strategy Raghunath Das Goswami is adopting. I am addressing to you Chatubi. How is he addressing his mind, Raghunath Das Goswami? Chatubi. Chatubi abhiyachet. Abhiyachana means in a prayerful mood, he is speaking. And Chatubi means with sweet language. So he's speaking with very sweet language. In other words, I want to flatter you, which is very important point, because the mind is very hard to cope with. So Raghunath Das Goswami is using this strategy. He's flattering his mind. And the reason is because it is very hard to cope with the mind. It is like a sponge absorbing everything. And avid material mind attached to material thing absorbs everything. We absorb all of these material impressions, living a material life, and we don't know ourselves how we are going to act. So in one sense, all our actions are basically based on the dictations of the mind. And the mind is simply working because of the material impressions, which are in the form of samskars. Paragraph 20. The mind is like a vacuum cleaner. It accumulates material impressions, storing and classifying them. And finally, it starts acting, being guided by these impressions that it has absorbed as if it is us. Us means here the soul. So in the Kapil Shiksha, especially where the Sankhya analysis is done in chapter 26, chapter 26 and 27, Kapil Dev explains how liberation can be attained by Jnana Yoga. So first he does the analysis of the 24 elements, and then how one can attain liberation by the practice of Jnana Yoga, that he discusses in chapter 27. So there, the chitta, I'm not able to draw here, but just to give an explanation, the chitta is the contaminated consciousness. And this has various compartments. So the first is the mind. One subcompartment is the mind, and the next immediate neighbor is the intelligence, and the next immediate neighbor is the false ego. And the major portion of this compartment is the unlimited material impressions. So the mind comes in contact with the sense objects through the external senses. And when the mind wants to enjoy the sense objects, then the mind dictates the intelligence, and the intelligence thereby, acts. The hand moves, the leg moves, and the tongue vibrates, or the tongue tastes material sense objects, just like you can take the example of tasting gulab jamun. So in one sense, gulab jamun is simply made of earth element, and the tongue is also made of a material element, bhumi, rapo, analo, vayu. So both material elements come in contact. The soul is spiritual. So there should be no effect. But we see that we taste some pleasure. So that pleasure is experienced at the level of the mind, and at a deeper and a subtler level, at the level of the ahankar, because of the identity that I am the enjoyer. So it is the intelligence which is subservient to the mind, which is under the dictation of the mind, and it wants to serve the false ego, that I want to enjoy that gulab jamun. So once we enjoy the gulab jamun, there is the impression in the antakaran, impression of that enjoyment of gulab jamun. So the next time when the mind sees, or the sense object sees gulab jamun, immediately we just start acting guided by these impressions. And this is how the whole phenomena works. So in the Kapil Shiksha, nicely this is explained. I just elaborated on it. The 19th century Russian poet Nekrasov, when explaining the nature of the Russian peasant, explained the nature of the mind. Okay, there's one question. Let us take this. Yes, Rasparang Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat. I will just take it down. Could you just tell the sequence again? First is the mind, the intelligence, and then the false ego, right?
Yes.
So if you go from outside to the soul, false ego is nearest to the soul, then intelligence, and then the mind, is it?
Correct. The subtlest is the false ego. So basically we see not through our senses, but we see through our mind's eyes. So it's a mind which sees the sense objects through the senses, like the eye. And it's a mind which wants to enjoy it. And the mind immediately goes to the next neighbor, intelligence, because the intelligence does the planning, how to enjoy that sense object. And because the intelligence is subservient to the mind, the intelligence does the planning, how to enjoy that sense object. And intelligence ultimately is controlled by the false ego, in fact. And it is the false ego of being the identity of an enjoyer, which wants to enjoy that. So at the deep, subtlest level, it is our false identity because of ahankar as the enjoyer. So the senses, like the hands and the karmendriyas, take the gulab jamun and then put it on the tongue. And, the mind relishes it. And ultimately, it is the false ego which feels happy. Wow, what a gulab jamun. So the mind, the next compartment is the intelligence, which does the planning. And the next subtlest compartment is the false ego, which is having the false identity of an enjoyer. And the major portion of the compartment is all these impressions, sense impressions, which we have accumulated for millions of lifetimes. So this is how the whole sequence is going on. And the soul is nowhere in the picture. The soul is nowhere in the picture. So we give that chariot analogy also. If you know that the horses are the senses, and when the horses see the sense objects, they want to enjoy the sense objects. So they drag the mind, which are the reins, and the reins are held by the intelligence, Sarati. And because although the intelligence is superior to mind, but because it is now in the conditioned stage, under the dictation of the, because the mind is superior to the intelligence now, because of the conditioned state, the intelligence becomes subservient to the mind. And that's why the Sarthi, instead of taking the soul to the temple, it takes him to the liquor bar. And then, the Sarthi is just pulled where the horses are pulled. And the horses are pulled towards the sense objects. And the mind is also pulled in that. So and the soul is just sleeping there as a passenger, driven in this body of the chariot. So that's how the whole phenomena happens. So that's what Maharaj is just explaining here. We are all guided by the impressions and we act as if it is us. So that's the point being made. I hope it is clear, Mataji.
Yes, Prabhuji. So till the time we are in the conditioned state, intelligence will be subservient to the mind.
Yes, it is always. So that's why, because the intelligence is corrupted, that's why we need to first spiritualize the intelligence, by now acting under superior intelligence. The superior intelligence is following the guidance or the dictations of the Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. So that's how we purify the intelligence. And with the purified intelligence, we control the mind and thereby control the senses and thereby not allow the senses to go towards the sense objects. So that's how we have to work on now. But it is always, we know that it is, how difficult it is. But that's why we need to understand how the phenomena happens. And Maharaj is here giving the whole understanding. Is it clear, Mataji?
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So for this statement, Maharaj gives a reference. The 19th century Russian poet Nekrasov, when explaining the nature of the Russian peasant, explained the nature of the mind. He said, the Russian peasant is like a bull. Once an idea has taken hold of the brain, it's almost impossible to eradicate. So we all have this experience. Once, the mind, dictates, I want that sense object. So once it dictates, then it starts harassing us. And as long as we don't get it, it is completely in hold of us, as though we are captivated. And, when children, especially when they go to the circus and they see some popcorn or something, the moment they want it, what they start doing, they start crying. and harass the parents. And until and unless you give that popcorn, the child will not allow. So similarly, this is the nature of the mind. So this is how this Russian poet has described. Arjuna was also speaking about this problem 5,000 years ago. How very difficult the mind is to deal with. It has power generated by material impressions. This is how the material energy is so powerful that it is very difficult to overcome. Uh, Therefore, as the Niti Shastras explain, in dealing with the mind, we remember that an enemy can be treated in different ways. So this is how the powerful material energy of the Maya, which is Maya in one sense is equal to the mind, is. So the Niti Shastras give a strategy on how to deal the enemy in different ways. So mind is our greatest enemy. So what are the Niti Shastras suggest? If we are stronger than the enemies, we punish them. So if we are strong, we punish them. But if we are not sure whether the enemies are stronger or not, we approach them to see if we can win over them. So this is the strategy also Raghunath Das Goswami is adopting here. Ai swantar bhratu chatubi yache. He's trying to win over the mind. Some people try to defeat their mind with caution, with impulsion, with force, trying to rein in their mind through force. So they try to apply force. But if you just try to rein the mind, it will kick up like a wild, unbroken horse and throw off its rider. So this we should have, some experience. Now, again in the Shastras, it is mentioned how one should regulate the mind. The mind, especially the horses, if you know that in horse racing, sometimes the horses are fed alcohol so that they can run very fast. They get intoxicated and they start running fast. Similar are our senses. The senses are highly intoxicated towards sense objects. They run towards the sense objects at such high speed. Horses physically run to reach the sense objects, to reach some point. But the way the senses run towards the sense objects, the contact which is established through the mind, it's very fast. So the senses are highly intoxicated towards the sense objects. And the mind is compared to the reins. And the Sarthi is the Sarthi is one who's holding the reins. So because the senses run towards the sense objects at such a high speed, if the Sarthi, that is the intelligence, tries to forcibly withdraw or pull the reins, what happens is that because the horses are very, very strong, the senses are very strong, the horses are very strong, and they're already intoxicated for sense objects, and you're trying to pull the reins. If you try to pull the reins, what will happen? Because the horses are very strong, they will overpower you and they will rush at a higher speed towards the sense objects. And the Sarthi, which is holding the reins, he will topple and fall down from the horse. So this is what happens. And on the other hand, if you leave loose the horses, then the chariot, ultimately the senses will go and deeply dive into sense objects and cause the fall down of the soul, or the chariot will go and hit in some direction and topple the soul in one sense. So even if you let it very loose, that's also destructive. If you try to hold it very tight, then the charioteer will fall down from the carriage. So both these strategies will not work. So the best way to regulate the mind, which is mentioned, is to allow the horses to, let a little loose and slowly try to regulate them, not very heavily or very strongly try to pull them by force. Because if you try to strongly pull by force, then they will topple you down. So this is the strategy, and we all have experience of this. The moment we try to heavily restrain our sense enjoyment, we more dive into sense enjoyment. That means we are thrown off from the chariot. So this is what our experience also says. Therefore, Raghunath Das Goswami takes a tactful approach. He says, "Oh, my mind, I love you so much. I love you so much. Trust me, I wish you well." So this is the tactful approach he takes. This method is very important. Some people try to reform themselves by force, and others say that you should just love yourself no matter how you behave. So these are two extreme. Too much force will not work because the charioteer will fall down, and too much loose, then the whole chariot, will be toppled. So both these strategies will not work. I remember in my school days, one of my friend was a son of a military officer, and the father was extremely strict, so strict, and the son was harassed by the father. And although the father was so strict about his habits, but still the son is to find out ways and means and jump into more sense enjoyment. So both these strategies are not so good. But Raghunath Das Goswami says, no, I am addressing you gently with touching, sweet words. My brother, my mind, you should make some profound changes in yourself, which are bound to be painful. So the mind, the moment you start regulating, it's very painful for the mind. And the mind doesn't like regulation. It wants to express free. It wants to act whimsically. That is demonic nature of the mind, to act whimsically. But if you try to regulate, the mind will revolt. So with sweet words, Raghunath Das Goswami is addressing the mind in order to make these profound changes. Any questions, as we are discussing? If you have, you can always raise your hands. Paragraph 24. This very first verse of the instructions to the mind raises the important problem for anyone attempting to follow a spiritual path, no matter which path they are following. So this first instruction, which is there to the mind, Prabhupada explains in the Bhagavad Gita and in the Updeshamrit. In all spiritual paths, the first business is to control the mind and senses. Any spiritual path, the first business is to control our mind and senses. So this is also what Raghunath Das Goswami is saying in order to go deeper into our spiritual practices. If we are trying to overcome the influence of the material energy, what we first need to overcome is identification with the mind, which is very difficult to conquer. It's very, very difficult to become free from the identification of the mind. So I was mentioning Devi Esha Gunamayi, Mama Maya Durattaya, Mameva Prapadyante Maya Maitam Tarat. The only way is to surrender. And here we can understand the influence of the material energy. I was giving that example of the car engine, which is running at a very, very, very high speed. In order to create that energy, and that energy is transformed into torsion, by which the gears and energy is shifted to the shaft, and the shaft to the axles, and the axle to the wheels. And very high energy is created by the engine, which now that is transformed into the movement of the wheels. So you have to overcome this energy of the mind, which is completely under the dictation of the material energy. And that's why whatever we do, whatever we speak, it is always the mind's voice. It's not the soul's voice. It's completely under the dictation of the mind. So it's very, very difficult to conquer this. Paragraph 25. In Patanjali Muni's Yoga Sutras, okay, Birendra Yadav Prabhu has a question. Yes, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam. So, Prabhu, just one clarification with regard to this analogy of chariot and charioteer. We said horses are the senses and reins are mind, and charioteer is the intelligence.
Correct.
And chariot is the body.
Chariot is the body, and the passenger is the soul who is sitting in the chariot.
Okay. Passenger is the soul. Right.
Yes. The passenger wants to go somewhere, but because the senses, that is the horses, are attract sense objects, and the senses are very strong, they overpower the mind. The reins are pulled in that direction, and the mind overpowers the intelligence, although the intelligence is superior to the mind. So the chariot is going in a different direction. So that's the situation of everyone in this material world, as long as one is not transcendentally situated. Okay. So we have to become free from the identification with the mind, which is very difficult. In Patanjali Muni's Yoga Sutras, he explains that a person identifies the self which can see with their ability to see or with their tools of sight. Now, please, this is a very interesting thing, and you have to carefully understand this. The person is that self, identifies the self who can see with their ability to see or with their tools of sight. Now, the eyes are the tools by which we see. The mind is also a tool by which we can think, but it is the soul which thinks, it is the soul which sees, but it is seen through the apparatus of the mind, the subtle apparatus, and the gross apparatus, that is the eye. I mean EYEI. Okay. These two concepts are confused. The tool being used and the self who is using these tools. Actually, the Atma, the self, is using the tool, the faculty of the mind to think, the faculty of the intelligence to discriminate, and the faculty of the eye to see. But in the conditioned state, what is happening? We get confused. The tool being used or the self who is using these tools. We become used by the tools. Patanjali explains that this confusion is what is called the false ego identification, which gives rise to all other difficulties and in turn develops into ignorance, avidya. It's because of the false ego. That is why we identify ourselves with the tool, and although we are using the tools. This is the point. Now, the next slide is I'm giving the reference of the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which Maharaj has not given, but this is an additional slide which I put here. So this is the sutra. Drishta drishti matra shuddhopi pratyayanu pashyaha. Drishta. Drishta is the seer. Now, who is the drishta? According to us, what is the drishta sometimes referred by us as? Who is the drishta? One hand, two hands have been raised. Yes, Rasparani Mataji.
Prabhuji, is it the soul?
Yes, not is it, it is the soul. It is the soul. So Drishta is the soul and Drishti. Drishti means the power of seeing. So there is you have to differentiate between those two. The power of seeing. Matra, only. Shuddha, pure. Api, although. Pratyaya, ideas or conceptions of the mind. So the power of seeing is, the instrument, the tool. The tool is the mind. And there are various ideas and conceptions in the mind. Anupashya, perceiving or seeing. So we are seeing through the mind. Drishta, drishtimata, shuddhopi, pratyaya, anupashya. The seer is nothing but the power of seeing, consciousness, which although pure, appears to see the conceptions of the mind. Because the seer is the soul is pure, and then there is the mind. And the mind is filled with unlimited impressions and various conceptions because of the identification of the false ego. And whatever is happening in the mind, the drishta should just see, but it gets influenced and starts, following the dictations of what it sees. And that's how, we are completely under the control of the material energy. So this is the point which is made through the Pachanjali Yoga Sutras. I'm giving another reference. This is from the Pramaya Ratnavali. Pramaya Ratnavali is a work of Srila Baldev Vidyabhushan. Pramaya means, truths. And Ratnavali means, Ratna means the jewels. Avali means a row of jewels. So the Dasha Mula Tattva, the 10 truths are presented by Baldev Vidyabhushan in Pramaya Ratnavali, that Vishnu is the absolute, the Jiva is part and parcel of him. And, the material energy is, expansion or the Bhairanga Shakti of the Lord. And like that, these truths are, mentioned. So there, when he explains the Jiva Tattva, Chaitanya Rupatvam Jnanitvadikam Sa Cha Sat Prashnam. The Prashna Upanishad explains the soul's consciousness, knowledge, and other qualities. Chaitanya Rupatvam. Chaitanya means consciousness. So this is also a point made here. The seer is consciousness. It's pure consciousness. And knowledge and other qualities. Jnanitva adikam. Adikam means other qualities. Just Sat Prashna. So in the Prashna Upanishads, this is mentioned. Esha hi drishta sprashta strota grata rasita manta bodha karta vijnanatma purusha iti. It is the individual soul, Esha. This soul, Esha, he, who perceives the activities of the senses. It is he who sees, drishta, touches, sprashta, hears, shrota, smells, and tastes, thinks, manta, and understands, bodha. So it is the soul, the individual soul, who sees through the senses. It is the soul who touches through the sense of touch. It is the soul who hears through the ears. It is the soul who smells through the nostrils. And it is the soul which tastes through the tongue. And it is the soul who thinks through the faculty of the mind. It is the soul who discriminates with the faculty of the intelligence. But when the soul which is now sleeping, it is completely whatever we see, we have to just see, oh, I'm seeing this. I'm different from this body. I'm different from the mind. I'm different from the senses. I have nothing to do with this, but we get influenced. We get influenced by the material energy. So this point is being made in both in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras and even in the Pramaya Ratnavali. Now, where this point is also made in the Gita, because the Gita is the, it's a Sarva Upanishado Gavo. It is the essence of all the Upanishads. So where in the Gita this same point is, emphasized or pointed out? Anyone knows which verse in the Gita is the same point made? Anyone knows? Raise your hands. It's a very important verse in the Gita. I can give you some hint if you want. Anyone knows? Okay, Krishna Path Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Prabhuji, I feel it is in 5th chapter, Naiva Kinchit Karomi.
Yes, perfect. This is the perfect quotation. Naiva Kinchit Karomiti Yukto Manyate Tatvat Pashan Shunvan Sparshan Jigran Ashnan Gachan Swapan Shoshan Pralapan Vishajan Grinan Unmishan Nimishan Napi Indriyani Indriyarteshu Bhartate Dharayan. Naiva Kinchit Karoti iti, a person in divine consciousness who is on the situated in self. Naiva Kinchit, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't do anything. Naiva Kinchit. He doesn't do anything. Huh? One who is Tattvavet. One who is a Tattvavet. Pashan, he's seeing. Shunvan, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, going, dreaming. When you're in the dream state, if one is awakened in self-conscious, self-realization, he's saying these are dreams which are, happening on the mirror of the mind. Why I have to get scared about it? This is all dream. But because of the conditioned state, we identify with the dreams and we, become fearful in the dreams. So even dreaming, breathing, talking, accepting, opening of the eyes, closing of the eyes. He says, Indriyani Indriyarteshu Vartate iti Dharayan. The senses are in contact with the sense objects. I have nothing to do with it. So this is the state of self-realization, where the seer is only using the tools and the tools don't use him. That's the point being made. So just to give an example to make the point emphatic, just like, you take your car and you go to the fuel station and you start filling the car tank. And, you are sitting in the car. What do you experience? Do you feel any difference? The car fuel tank is being filled. You have nothing to do with it, So you are completely, aloof from it, that activity. But the same thing when you're filling our belly with food, do you feel that same experience? How much we get affected, we either overeat or we eat the sweets which we like a lot, and we overfuel it. So the person at the gas station will not overfuel, overfill the tank, but we overfill our tank because we identify. That is the reason. So this is the point also being made here. So I hope this concept is clear. That's why I discussed in a little detail about this. Okay, now coming back to the explanation of what Maharaj is saying, and with these two verses quotations, the Pramaya Ratnavali, Bhagavad Gita, and the Patanjali Sutras, it is more clear, I think. What tools do we possess? These are the mind and senses. These are the tools. When we use these tools, we identify with them because we derive pleasure from them. So we identify with these tools. Why? Because of the tendency to enjoy pleasure. We can run, and since we derive some pleasure in running, we like to identify with the tools that enable us to do so. The same happens when we drive a car. We feel enjoyment associated with the subtle psychology of dominion over this material nature. Just imagine the psychological level which Maharaj is explaining. Any instrument which you get, material instrument, moment we start controlling it, there is a tendency of controlling material nature. Even a remote also can make us feel like that. We are able to control. We are reluctant to take the position of the observer. Just, sit back and observe the activities of the senses and the activities of the mind, and, separate ourselves from that. It is very difficult because of this, contaminated consciousness of being the enjoyer. In reality, according to the highest spiritual philosophy, we are always the observer. We are always the observer. However, we do not like being an observer because the observer cannot really enjoy. This is the reason we don't want to take that position of an observer. Unless the observer identifies with what is going on, there is no enjoyment. Now, in the next paragraph, Maharaj gives an example to understand this principle, what he is stating. Let us try to understand this example, because examples make things clear. Sometimes the principles are very difficult to understand, but the examples make things clear. Let us see this example. The observer does not enjoy, and the enjoyer does not observe. Mark this point. The observer does not enjoy, and the enjoyer, one who is in the enjoying mood, he cannot observe. Please reflect on this statement. I heard, some college, management college, where I'd gone to give a talk on sutras for positive thinking, where I was explaining this analogy of the, the soul, like the user, and the software is like the mind, subtle body, and the hardware is like the gross body. So the user is supposed to use the computer, but whatever is happening, something pops up, and we, click that pop and we get carried away. Instead of doing our own work with the computer, we get carried away. And we know how many times we sit in the computer to do some work, but something else comes up and we get carried away. So he was saying that once, I don't know whether it's a true story, that Socrates is a great thinker and a philosopher. Prabhupada said he was a self-realized soul. So Socrates went to a circus, in the countryside. There are these huge malls of circus where, a lot of games are played, a lot of food items are sold. People go to enjoy. And Socrates visited this place. And his friend, philosopher, was amazed. Socrates, how can you go to such a place? You're a philosopher. So Socrates remarked that, I just went to observe what people enjoy and take pleasure in. So Socrates went to that place, not with a mood of enjoyment, but with a, with the mood of being an observer, as to see what people take pleasure in. So the enjoyer does not observe. The enjoyer does not observe. Now let's see this example and try to understand if you have not understood the principle. For example, if we are watching two people fighting, we will not be able to enjoy the fight if we do not identify with one of them. We are given tools and by using them, we can experience a feeling or a sensation. But having come to the material world, we get various experiences. It is very easy and natural for us to identify with those experiences. In a moment, when we identify with the experiences, we may feel nothing but enjoyment. However, the consequences are very sad. Any yoga or any spiritual path teaches that we must withdraw and take the position of observers. So recently I heard from my friend devotee that there was one basketball match which was happening live. This is in America. And there was one very famous player in one side who was, well known for playing basketball, and many spectators had come to watch this match, and they had a lot of hopes on this person who will win for their team. And some of the opponents were able to, win the match, and he failed miserably. In fact, he failed so miserably that the spectators who expected, because there is, expectation of an experience which will give them happiness, they expected. So they, in the stadium, started yelling and shouting and started, throwing all objects on him, and created a huge, chaos in the stadium. And this basketball player could not understand, and suddenly, in order to calm the crowd, the police was there. He said, he made a statement on the loudspeaker. Hey, calm down. It's just a game. What happened if you lose? It's just a game. So when they heard this statement of this basketball player, they got still even wild, and they got out from the stadium and, completely attacked this basketball player. And there was a huge chaos. And this basketball player could not understand why, it was just a game. Why did they react so much? Because they wanted to, in that experience of winning and, he performing, and they would get that pleasure. Because they did not get, they went berserk. So this basketball player could not understand the reason why, the audience were experiencing this. So he decided that let me experience this. And because he was a famous player, he had to, cover himself so that nobody identifies him. And he went for a basketball match, and he identified with some team. And there, when the match was going on, he got hooked into that experience. And because he was identifying with this particular team, and he was, cheering them up, and he was going through that experience, and he was feeling the pleasure, and he could now understand, his audience who were expecting from him to perform, how they were experiencing that happiness. But all these experiences, ultimately the consequence is very sad. Ichha dvesha samuttena dvanda mohena bharat sarvamutanam sammoham sargayanti parantapa. This rag and dvesh, because of this ichha dvesh, samuttena, completely caught in it. Sammoha means it is samyak rupena moha, complete bewilderment. That's how it glides our consciousness, or sargayanti parantapa. So this is how it happens. This is the phenomena which I gave this example. How, when we identify with the tools, then this is what happens. Okay. Any questions, any clarifications up till now? Anyone has? Okay, so I'll take few more paragraphs to finish this discussion. I told you this is a long discussion which Maharaj is going to explain of the phenomena of how Raghunath Das Goswami is addressing his mind with sweet words. What is the reason? These are the reasons. Yes, Virendra Yadav Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, Dhanvat Pranam. Prabhu, just one clarification. This being at the state of observer, it is the state of Sthita Pragya?
Yes, it is the state of Sthita Pragya, of being the state of observer. It is the state of Sthita Pragya. So until we, we are on the transcendental platform and we don't identify the soul is not affected by the modes, because the moment the modes affect us, we get carried away. The influence of the modes carried away, because the modes act on the at the subtle level at the mind. The influence is more of the modes is on the mind basically, and we get influenced and then carried away by the modes. So when we are transcendental to the modes, that means we are on the Sthita Pragya platform. Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, Krishna Prabhuji. Yes.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, when we are saying that mind, we have to, we should not be too strict or too loose about mind.
Yes.
But the person or the entity which is now seen as being not very strict or very loose, who is that entity?
Come again. What exactly? I'm not able to. We discussed that in with respect to that if we try to restrain the mind, if we try to rein the mind, it will throw the passenger off the chariot.
Right.
That context we had discussed. So what was your point then?
My question was, one has to be neither too strict nor too loose about his mind. So when we say this statement, who is that one?
Oh, that no. So right now, it is we as a soul, but the soul is completely sleeping, and we are just following our impressions of the mind. So for us, it is Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra.
Okay.
So through Guru, Sadhu, Shastra, we slowly regulate the the mind with superior intelligence.
Okay.
Evam buddhe param buddhva samstabhya atmana jai shatru mahabhavo kamarupa duras. That's what Krishna in the Gita is saying, that evam, understanding that buddhe param buddhva, understanding that superior to the intelligence is the soul, understanding that samstabhya, study, atmana, the mind, atmana, here also see atmana, by deliberate intelligence, jai shatrum, conquer this enemy, kamarupa durasidam. So Prabhupada, you see, study the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence. Prabhupada says Krishna consciousness, by spiritual strength. Conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust, which is residing in the mind. Lust is basically the desire. So evam buddhe param buddhva. So this is the how we have to understand. So
is it that good mind and bad mind? That good dog and bad
dog. Yes.
Okay.
So Bhaktivinoda Thakur makes a point, a very interesting point in Bhakti-aloka. He says that in the conditioned state, what is material intelligence and spiritual intelligence? He says material intelligence is that which is under the dictation of the mind and the senses. And spiritual intelligence means, he says, that which is under the dictation of the soul. The soul dictates, I want to go here. The intelligence follows. The intelligence dictates the mind dictates the senses, and the senses go where the soul has determined to go there. So that is spiritual intelligence. But material intelligence means it is under the dictation of the mind and the senses. So in the conditioned state, we are always under the dictation of the material intelligence, which is contaminated, or the mind also, you can say. So we have to, mold our lives by being under the dictation of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, and slowly purify the intelligence. When the intelligence is completely purified, then it acts under the dictation of the soul. Otherwise, the intelligence is acting under the dictation of the senses and the mind. That's the point. Is it clear?
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Yes, Vesile Prabhuji, you have a question?
Yes, Hare Krishna Prabhuji. I
Yes.
was just wondering, it would follow that the more intelligent the person, then the harder it is for him or her to conquer the intelligence. Is that correct?
Now, when we refer to more intelligence, we might be referring to the material intelligence.
Yes.
Yes. So, yeah, that's why you see in the material world, those who are very materially intelligent, who are doing very good in the material world, for them it is very difficult to come to spiritual practices. Krishna in the 7th chapter, he says, what is that verse? I'm not able to recollect. Maya aprita jnana asurim bhavam ashrita. Namam dushkritano muda prapadyante naradama. Maya aprita jnana asurim bhavam ashrita. Maya aprita jnana. So this Prabhupada, this Maya aprita jnana gives this is one of the longest purports Prabhupada gives in the Gita. And he compares this Maya aprita jnana to, the scientist or the learned, materialistic, demonic, people, he says, who are, great scholars even of Bhagavad Gita, he says. So they are Maya. So it becomes, if somebody is having very high material intelligence, then it's still more difficult. And we see today also in the material world, somebody who's very accomplished in the material world as a great scientist, but still he succumbs to his, senses and performs sometimes activities which degrade the soul. So the more one has faith in Guru, Sadhu and Shastra, although from a material point of view, he might not be very intelligent, but if he's following the instructions of Guru, Sadhu and Shastra, he can attain success. Is it okay, Prabhuji?
Yes. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Yeah. Okay, so we will stop here and continue our discussion. It's a very elaborate discussion Maharaj is giving, which is very important for us to understand. And this helps us in our day-to-day life of how to deal with the mind. So we will continue our discussion next week, and at least we need 3-4 classes to finish Maharaj, explanation on verse 1, and we'll go systematically and slowly. Shri Manah Shiksha ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Shri Raghunath Das Goswami ki jai. Hare Krishna.